Welcome to Improve Your English Writing, video number 24. We'll be covering the three-step editing process, but we are drilling down into correctness and covering some grammar topics. And among those grammar topics, we'll be talking about that versus which, when to use it, contractions, and gender bias. So if you'd like to get notifications for this series, please click subscribe. If you like the video or think others will find it useful, please click like and check out links to videos and books in the description. For example, there's a link to the companion volume, Improve Your English Writing. So let's talk about that versus which. So the pronouns that, which, and who introduce a relative clause. And a relative clause is a dependent clause. And using that or which depends on what type of relative clause you have. So if you have an essential relative clause means it's a clause which defines or restricts the meaning of the element it modifies. If you're unsure what I just said, go to video number 4, which is the essential grammar, part 3. Basically, an essential clause will define or limit the element. And a non-essential relative clause only adds information and could be removed from the sentence without affecting its meaning. So that's one of the big ways you can tell is you need a relative clause to determine meaning. Non-essential, you don't need the clause to determine meaning. And sometimes the difference between essential and non-essential clause is, I would say, difficult, or maybe it's not really important in the context. So, and then I know my examples are usually single sentences and you're not getting the full. You could write this and maybe this sentence could be one or the other based upon the larger context. So, a lot of these examples are just basing it upon the single sentence, and I'm sometimes assuming a little bit the context, but I've tried to make the examples to be pretty much the sentence would say if it's essential or non-essential. So, use who to refer to people or named pets. So for a relative clause, I want to say, I don't know if it's easy, but you use who in a relative clause when it's referring to people or a named pet. Examples are Mary is the manager who, because Mary is a person. Mary who, so Mary is the manager who manages accident claims. You never use like Mary's a manager that, it would be who, because you have to use who because it refers to people. Or here's an example of a pet. The vet examined Belle, who was not eating or drinking. So we have the named pet, so we use who. So let's move on to that. You use that to refer to a collective noun or to introduce an essential clause. So remember, an essential clause is one that's necessary for the meaning. So use that with a collective noun or for a clause that's necessary for the meaning. An essential clause is not set off with commas. Now, I know I'll probably cover this more in the punctuation in a few videos from now, but I just want to be crystal clear that you do not set off an essential relative clause with commas, so there's no commas. Here's an example of a collective noun. So team is a collective noun here. The team that wins the championship receives a $5,000 prize. So we use that because it refers to a collective noun. Where are the keys that I left on the desk? So here we're saying that I left on the desk. That introduces this relative clause here. We're saying this clause is essential to the meaning because we don't know which keys. Maybe they're talking about, what type of keys are they talking about? Well, we're defining what type of keys. It's the ones that are on the desk. So we use that because we're saying this is essential to the meaning. And computers that are used for gaming are expensive. So here that starts this relative clause right here are the that are used for gaming. This modifies computers. We're saying that this relative clause is essential because we could be talking about any type of computer. Maybe it's a work computer, a laptop. I don't know. There's different types of computers, but we're saying computers that are used for gaming. So since this clause is essential for the meaning of what type of computers that we're talking about, we use that to start it. Now let's talk about which. Which is actually used to introduce non-essential clauses. So basically clauses that are not essential to the meaning. That could be removed and you would still understand the sentence. Or the thing that's being described is already limited or described or defined. Now, which may be used for an essential clause when the word that has already been used in the sentence for an essential clause. So effectively you have like two relative clauses, usually they're following each other, and you don't want to say that twice, that blank blank blank, that blank blank blank. In English, you want some variety, so you could use which to start an essential clause which when that has already been used. I do have an example. And essential relative clauses are set off with commas. Let's look at some examples. My truck, which is a Ford F-150, needs an oil change. Now, we'd probably know from the context what type of truck this person drives. So since this defining which type of truck I have is probably not essential, it could probably be removed without affecting the meaning. This is a non-essential clause, so we start it with which and we set it off with commas. Because non-essential, we start with which, and right here non-essential clauses are set off with commas, so we use the commas. October's expense report, which was emailed Friday, contained a blatant error. So we probably know from the context that the October's expense report was probably emailed Friday, right? If we just said the expense report, if we cut off the October, we probably could say the expense report that was emailed Friday. Then we may actually have a restrictive clause because we don't know which report we're talking about. But here, October's expense report, so this has already been defined, and this which was emailed Friday is probably not essential to the meaning and probably could be deleted. We probably delete this and understand. So therefore, we start this relative clause with which, and we set it off with commas. The third one is management must enforce the rules that they made recently that were controversial. So both these relative clauses that start with which modify rules. So since they're both essential, they start with that, or they will start with that, and we don't separate them with commas. But remember, this is my example. You're saying, hold on, this is an example of I thought we were working with which and non-essential, and here you throw in an example of using that. Well, this is the example of, or maybe I almost said next, where we have a second that. So the management enforced the rules that they made that were controversial. Now up here it says we may use which when for that when there's already been an essential, or when that's already been used. So technically this can be a which. That's what I say here in this bullet here, is that we could actually say management must enforce the rules that they made recently which were controversial. I bet you that's how most people would say it personally, but saying it with two that's is perfectly fine. Writing it with two that's is perfectly fine. Or you could change this one that, or this that here, or the that is right here, to which, and still be good. And then I've thrown in the little tidbit, maybe this sentence is best written. This is just an example so I can show the uses of that's and which, but realistically you probably wouldn't write this. It's probably best written, management must enforce the recent controversial rules. So you probably reduce this all down. to this sentence here, but I'm just trying to demonstrate the uses of that versus which. So contractions, basically, some common contractions are don't, it's, your, and basically don't use contractions in formal writing except o'clock. So in formal writing, do not use contractions. Do not do it. Just say, instead of saying don't, you say do not. So instead of saying it's, you say it is. Instead of saying you're, you say you are. Don't use contractions in formal writing. Informal writing is like academic writing, newspaper, magazines, books, business reports, business letters, and so on. Now for informal writing, or limit the contractions in informal writing. So, no one's going to beat you up in informal writing. In informal writing, what I mean by that is emails, Facebook, Twitter, and so on. No one's going to probably come out and say you use too many contractions. But if you want to improve your writing, which you're trying to have superior writing, trying to teach superior writing, you will want to limit the use of contractions in informal writing. So when you're doing formal writing, no contractions. When you're doing informal writing, it's okay to use contractions, just don't use too many of them. What I'm saying is, that's not to say, you can't use a contraction and no contractions in an email, and the next email some, then none. No, it just means you can't have every sentence of contraction. Some contractions in an email, perfectly fine on Facebook and Twitter. Now the gender bias. Generic nouns like consumer, doctor, and manager can refer to any gender. And maybe before I start this whole segment on gender bias, I'm not interested about any political views. I'm not trying to express a political view. I'm just talking about grammar. So if you're going to post about political views, I don't care. I may delete the comment because I'm trying to focus on the grammar. So all this information is per the grammar books. So generic nouns like customer, doctor, and manager can refer to any gender. And when you use a generic noun, when the generic noun is singular, and you have a known gender based on the context, use the appropriate singular pronoun. For example, my doctor immediately responds to her emails. So here you have a generic noun, you're using this female pronoun, but we know the doctor to be female, therefore it's okay to use the female pronoun. So the problem arises, though, the gender bias problem occurs when you have a singular pronoun that refers to a generic noun with an unknown gender. And the problem is the pronoun that you use must apply to all genders. So in the past, what everyone did was they'd use the pronoun he. But they would use she if it occurred in a female-dominated profession like a secretary, teacher, or nurse. So what you did is that you would just stick in, when you came across this singular pronoun, which was, a generic noun, and you had a unknown gender, you'd just stick in he or she. Well, basically, doing that, using he, she, his, her, to refer to a singular generic noun where you have an unknown gender is not acceptable, is no longer acceptable in formal and informal writing. So what do you do? So here's what you do. So some style guides, those are just rule books, allow the occasional use of phrases he or she or his or her with a singular generic noun. I stress the use of occasional, but basically when we go through the various methods to eliminate gender bias, you'll see you really don't need he or she anymore. You don't even need to use it anymore. So, but some style guides do allow the occasional use. It's just like I said, Oh, this is no longer necessary. I was just saying that. With the recent endorsement of singular they. If you're not too sure what singular they is, I will get to it. Basically, it's in method 5 in an upcoming slide. So if you've never heard of singular they, I'll get to it. So no longer necessary because we can use what's called singular they. And do not use he slash she, his slash her, him slash her, and she s slash she, whatever, however you ever say this. Do not use these. Do not use these. These were used at one time, but do not use them. So there are 5 methods that you can use to remove gender bias, and the context will determine which method is appropriate. And basically, if you can't remove the gender bias, rewrite the sentence. So let's get to the 5 methods. Method 1 is just omit the pronoun. Sometimes the pronoun isn't even needed. Shockingly, you can just delete it. The original, the doctor never responds to his emails. You could just write, the doctor never responds to emails. Just remove the pronoun. Simple. And I'm going to tell you, method 1 and 2 are probably my 2 most used go-to methods. And method number 2 is replace the pronoun with an article. So you replace it with an a or a the. Original, the manager forgot to open her package. Just write, the manager forgot to open the package. Just replace the pronoun with an article. Remember, just going back up here, just remove the article. But as you can see, maybe I should back up. Not all these work in every circumstance. So let's get on to method 3, is you repeat the noun. So this works best, though, when the generic noun and the pronoun are separated by many words. So they can't be really close together or sounds funny because you're repeating the same word right next to each other. And people don't like to hear that. So this works best when they're separated by many words. A parent should be careful not to criticize a child because her words may have long-lasting effects. You could replace this with, a parent should be careful not to criticize a child because a parent's words may have long-lasting effects. I just want to go back to my method number 2 of replacing with an article. Why don't you just use the here? A parent should be careful not to criticize a child because the words may have long-lasting effects. So you don't need to replace the noun, and the sounds better. So like I said, usually a method 1 or 2 of my go-to methods. So you can, method number 4 is to change the noun to plural. The problem with this one is you may change the meaning of the sentence because maybe it needed to be singular. You change it because if you change it to plural, you get rid of the singular pronoun problem. So a politician should always conduct himself appropriately. You change it, this is politicians should always conduct themselves appropriately. So you have no gender bias here, but what you've done is you changed it to S, and maybe you didn't want to do that because you needed the singular. So, but you can maybe change the noun to plural, and then you eliminate. You have to change the pronoun, but you've eliminated the gender bias. So that's method number 4. And method number 5 is singular they. So use the pronoun they. The term singular they refers to using a plural pronoun or the plural pronoun they to refer to a singular generic noun. So basically, when I backed up and said, oh, we have this plural pronoun, we got rid of the gender bias. And that's effectively what you're doing now, is that you're just going to use a plural pronoun. You're just, instead of the singular pronoun. And this is now acceptable. It's technically grammatically incorrect to, if you go back to the last video on consistency, you're not being consistent in number. Now that's true, we're not being consistent in number anymore, but by using the generic, or by using singular they, you're actually getting rid of the gender bias. So you have introduced this not consistent in number, but you're knowingly doing this to get rid of the gender bias, and it is acceptable now. So it's maybe not really being wrong in number, because you're actually using now an acceptable plural pronoun. And maybe you shouldn't call it, maybe we call it a plural pronoun, because it's actually singular, they. So I guess they is singular and plural, even though I always will think of it as plural. So for many years, singular they was used in informal writing, while this acceptance in formal writing steadily grew. So what happens is that you would see singular they was being used in, like in emails and stuff, but you wouldn't see it in formal writing, like academic writing. But its use slowly grew. And I just want to say, like in the Chicago Manual of Style, the 2017 print, and the Associated Press 2019 print, they state singular they in formal writing is acceptable, but should be avoided. Both are recommended rewording first. So they're saying, okay, you can use it, it's acceptable, but try not to use it, and try to reword first. Then what happened, starting in 2019 though, and starting in 2019, singular they gained significant acceptance in formal writing. Who knows? I'm thinking this video 10 years from now will probably be quite outdated, because it'll be fully accepted, but at least you're getting a little bit of a history lesson for those people watching this in the future. In September 2019, it was added to the Merriam-Webster.com dictionary. So good news, if you're doing historical research, it was added in September 2019, if you're unsure when it was added. But it was added, that's when it was added. And then in 2020, with the publication of the APA manual, not too sure what month that was, the APA manual endorsed it and was added to the MLA website. I'm not too sure what month that was. I probably have it written down in my notes. But basically in 2020, you had two other now, or you had two of the 5 most common style manuals endorsing it and using it. In 2021, the MLA actually added it to, in April, when that book was published. That was the month was the 9th edition was published. They actually had it. It's actually in the book. So they added it to the website in 2020, and then they actually added it to the book. No doubt, I'm thinking when Chicago Manual Style and AP are printed in the next editions, they will probably have topics singular they will be covered that will match these two manuals. So you can see Chicago Manual Style, they're already going there, and then these other manuals have picked up on it. So basically singular theys, I'm getting at, is quite well accepted now. So let's look at some examples. Here's the original. A teacher should not discipline a student because her actions may fall outside the school's policy. You can actually rewrite revision 1, which is my method 2, just replace it with the. The teacher should not discipline a student because the actions may fall outside the school's policy. Like I said, method 1 and 2 are sort of my go-to. You can replace it with the. Now, you're saying, hold on, Ken, aren't you talking about singular they? Well, I'm just trying to show you can revise it this way, or you can actually revise it this way. You can use singular they. A teacher should not discipline a student because their actions may fall outside the school's policy. This there, which is in the before this, you probably call this a plural pronoun. I know singular they, but now this is they is being now used in a singular sense, so you actually do not have any gender bias. Which one you can use either, which one you choose is just your personal preference. Here's another example. Every taxpayer must file his tax return on or before April 15th. Obviously, there's some gender bias here with the use of the word his. So how do we fix this? Well, there's two ways. Whoops. Oh, original 2. Sorry. Original 2 is, or maybe you saw it written this way, like maybe person knew this was gender bias and decided to write every taxpayer must file his or her tax return on or before April 15th. Well, there's two ways to fix this. Method number 1 is you could just replace it with an with a article. Every taxpayer must file a tax return on or before April 15th. One acceptable way, like I said, this is actually method 2, or you can use method number 5, singular they. Every taxpayer must file their tax return on or before April 15th. Here using singular they to overcome the gender bias. So there you go. Many examples to overcome gender bias, and like I said, methods 1 and 2 are usually my go-to ones. If not, I probably have used singular they most often, and then probably method number 4, which is where it's spaced out between them. Words are I'm just basically repeating the noun. And method 4, which is changing to plural, I probably use the least often. So there you go. I believe that's it for this video. It's been a long video, but if you'd like to get notifications for this series, please click subscribe. If you like the video, please hit like, and check out links to books and videos in the description. Thank you.